more. And today we're going to find out more about heart disease, particularly for women, and encourage you to know the signs of a heart attack and to get your heart checked with a healthcare provider and why that is a good thing. Joining us from WomenHeart is Joy O'Neill. Hey, Joy.
Hey, how are you?
I am doing well. I've looked forward to this conversation because I think it's an important one. I think we should all be reminded that heart disease is the number one killer for both men and women, but I know you are big on encouraging women to know the signs. So while heart disease is recognized as a public health burden, or not always, it's not commonly known as the number one killer. So what do the numbers say, Joy, about how many women are affected by heart disease?
Well, you're exactly right. And I think most people know that it is the number one killer for men. But what generally surprises folks is that it's the number one killer of women. And it kills even 12 times more women than breast cancer. And that 1 in 3 women have a risk factor that's going to make us more prone to heart disease. And, and even unfortunately, Black women or Native American women or other women of color experience all those health disparities, and their rates of outcomes are even worse than those others. And I just want women to be aware of those statistics and knowledgeable about their own heart health and advocate for their own care so that nobody ever has to go through the experience that I went through in my own journey with heart disease.
Joy, you fall into those statistics. When you talk about knowing your own journey, man, you have really lived one. And we forget when we hear those staggering numbers and you throw out those type of statistics that those are actually people. Those are people connected to families. Those are our neighbors. Those are our coworkers. So how was your life affected by heart disease?
Oh, it's dramatically affected mine, and not only mine, but my children's as well, and my families and my friends. My own personal story is that in 2014, I went to the doctor and said that I was tired, started gaining weight, didn't quite feel like myself. And I was really just sort of pushed aside and told that I was just getting to be older than I used to be and maybe, needed to go out. My kids had gone off and gone to college, so we were sort of this empty nest, and, maybe it was just the changes that I was going through and all these sort of things, and just really dismissed. And then by 2015, I continued to go to the doctor and complain. I had lots of respiratory infections, just wasn't myself. I had gained a ton of weight, very out of breath, and again, just dismissed and told that it was just part of getting older. Just, go out with your friends, have a glass of wine, eat a Mediterranean diet, all of those sorts of things. And finally, because I did push and push, my doctor did test me for things like diabetes. They did a scan to make sure I didn't have any cancer and a bunch of blood work. And I just, he suggested maybe you're depressed or anxious or maybe it's a mental health issue, and just really ignored everything except for the number one thing that might have killed me, which was heart disease. And so in my circumstance, where I worked, we went through a succession planning, and they offered a life insurance policy plan. And so I went to go get a life insurance policy, and they did an EKG as part of that policy. And I received a letter in the mail saying that they were going to have to change my rates because I had not disclosed my heart disease. And I was just like mad as a wet hen, thinking, what do you mean heart disease? I'm perfectly healthy. I keep going to the doctor and they tell me there's nothing wrong with me. And so it was because of that I ended up seeing a cardiologist, and one thing kind of led to another. And it turns out that I had advanced heart failure.
That's crazy.
And that's why I had felt so badly. And so for 2 years, I had been misdiagnosed, and fortunately, I was able to get into a women's heart clinic here at our local hospital, and they were, able to immediately begin treatment. But, I will always wonder, up until my deathbed, if I had been able to receive treatment 2 years earlier, if I had known that heart disease is the number one killer of women, if I had been able to advocate for my own health, or if I had been able to just insist that my heart be checked, how much longer might I have lived?
Well, I think that's such a good message, Joy, for all the women listening to Good Things, but then just all of us. We know our bodies better than anyone, but women intentionally sometimes sort of push signs and symptoms under the rug. We push the envelope a little farther than we should in terms of burning both ends at this, or burning the candle at both ends, as they say, especially this time of year with the holidays. And we just ignore some of those signs and symptoms. We don't advocate for ourselves. In fact, we want someone to tell us, oh, it's just all in your head, keep going. So what are some of those signs and symptoms, Joy, that we should not be ignoring?
Well, obviously chest pain, that's one that's common in both men and women. But women's signs of heart disease are often more subtle, and they can be things like jaw pain, nausea, indigestion, unusual fatigue, dizziness, backache, short of breath, things that a lot of times a doctor might just sort of push off as if it could be something else, or it could present as something else. And I think you just really have to insist that your heart be checked.
And can we do that? I mean, it feels like sometimes as a patient, Joy, you're not a doctor, I know, so, but it feels like sometimes it feels, not proper to just tell your doctor, well, I want the test, whether you tell me I need it or not, like to kind of push, against authority just a little bit. So, but what I'm hearing you tell us, Joy, is that we should sort of just insist and say, oh, come on, just appease me, let's make sure that everything's okay, or we may not know what even test to sort of ask for.
Right. And I think that, some of the great resources that I hope that y'all are going to put on the station, is like if you go to getheartchecked.org, there's a tip sheet and a wonderful PSA. And I really do believe that doctors are great people and that they have our best interests, in mind as they're describing and prescribing things. But I think that it's our responsibility as women to stand up for our own selves. And, we would not hesitate to do that with a doctor if it was something with our child or our parents or our husband or anybody else in our lives. We are the first to be their advocate. But we have to advocate for ourselves as well. And, if the doctor doesn't listen, then I would suggest go to a second doctor and, at least rule that out. Just rule out my heart. Then let's look at what else is.
I completely agree, Joy. And we've got a lot of husbands and brothers and, male people who play dominant roles in women's lives in terms of the male role listening to Good Things too. And I say, if you're listening to these signs and symptoms and the woman in your life is complaining of these things, be her advocate too. Make sure you stay on her to go and make sure she has her checkups and make sure that she's getting that checked, and don't let her just, brush that under the rug. Tell her to stop and take care of herself so she can be around longer to take care of you. And two, I think it can work both ways of being encouragers to make sure that we take care of ourselves in the way that we should, and don't let things just get pushed under the rug when they shouldn't be.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially this time of year, with the holidays being so busy, there's a lot of stress on women. And, oh my goodness, the Deep South in football, how much stress can football put on us, especially after last weekend, right? So there's just, this time of year, women are more likely to have a cardiac event than any other time of the year.
And I think that's
because of all the stress.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that as well, Joy, and to be advocates for ourselves, to know those signs and symptoms. If you're having, you mentioned chest pains, back pain, heartburn, any of your arms feeling funny. And I just took from your own personal story, Joy, just that lingering fatigue. I mean, we all feel like we could use more sleep, but if you just know, and in your heart of hearts, pun intended, that maybe you just, it's not just the change or it's not just whatever, then make sure you continue to be a little persistent for your own health with your own healthcare provider. You mentioned some great resources. What would be some websites you would send our listeners to?
It's called getheartchecked.org, and they have a tip sheet and a wonderful PSA that you can play to learn more about women and heart disease. And I think another thing I would recommend that women do is, because of COVID and coronavirus and so many of the things going on right now, that not only is that stressful, but it can make people a little bit uneasy about going to the doctor or insisting on going to get screening because of COVID. But it's so important that you not just push that aside and not go to the doctor if you're having any of those symptoms. And, just make sure that you go. Don't just say, oh, I'll go tomorrow, or if this sticks around, we'll go in a couple of days. You still need to go. That is critical.
Well, all good information, Joy. I appreciate your time. I'm so happy to hear that you are doing well and called it early. But you guys stick with us. We've got more good things for you coming up next.